Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. I'm honestly a big fan of Tori, and you'll be too as soon as you see her amazingly creative way in which she processes her life through her art. There's one post about grief being a gift that keeps on giving, which immediately drew me in, and I was hooked. Tori and I had an immediate connection, even though this interview was the first time we spoke in person. And I'm so grateful to her deciding to share about the topic of grief in relation to a person when the relationship in life was difficult, which is another place where our lives run in parallel.
And I appreciated that was a beautiful moment that we couldn't have had, in another world. And doesn't make up for the loss. You're not like, oh, I saw a beautiful sunset. I'm glad that Dad wasn't around. But it's just one of those things that sort of maybe one of those early moments that made me feel like, okay, life goes on. It's not better or worse. It just continues. And there's beauty. There's things in the world that now that have happened that I've experienced that, I wouldn't have if my dad hadn't died.
About this week's guest. Tori Press is an artist, author, and anxious human being. She spent 10 years as a graphic designer before quitting to create some space in her life. In 2016, she bought herself a set of markers and began drawing pictures, inspired by her yoga practice, mental health struggles, and everyday life. This decision started her on an extraordinary adventure of self-discovery and human connection. Her drawings help her cultivate mindfulness, gratitude, and self-acceptance, and she hopes they do the same for others. She is the author of 2 books, How to Feel Better, a companion and workbook for dealing with tough times, including grief and loss, and I'm Definitely, Probably Enough, I think. This is another exciting conversation, which I am sure you'll enjoy as much as I did. So welcome, Tori. It's so nice to have you as a guest on the podcast. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing pretty well. Yeah, I'm having a good day.
And for those people listening, I'm actually sitting here on Zoom looking into Tori's office. And if you haven't seen her Instagram profile, this is the place where I've connected with her because I'm just fascinated by the way you are processing your life. And I love your creativity. I'm really an honest fan. But also, it really spoke to me how you processed recent grief experiences that you have. And so this is how we came to set up this time. So thank you so much for making that time.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to share some of my experience with your audience.
Mm. So why don't we start with you telling us and the listener a little bit about your story of loss and trauma?
Sure. Well, I lost my father very unexpectedly about, maybe 9 months ago at this point, 10 months ago. We had just been visiting. He was we knew he was not doing so well. He'd been having some heart trouble, little chest pains, but never anything that the doctor was alarmed about, never anything that he had to go to the hospital for. I had spent a week there. I live 2,500 miles away from my family. So I went there with my husband and kids, had a lovely week together, which was in retrospect such a blessing to have had that time. And less than a week after we left, he went to the hospital for some routine. He was getting an EKG, a nuclear stress test, some stuff to just check out what might be going on with his heart. And I woke up, I texted him the night before, said, good luck, thinking about you, hoping you get good news. And then I woke up the next morning to a text from my mom that said, give me a call, I have an update. And whenever it's not bad news, my mom she'll say, everything's fine, but call me. She did not say that this time. So it was just a moment where I'm on the West Coast of the US and they're on the East Coast. So I was 3 hours behind everything. I just sat bolt upright in my bed and I thought, oh gosh, something is wrong. And so I called, my mom couldn't get a hold of her and called my brother, and he was in quite a state and just started rambling about cardiac arrest. And I just, at that point, had no idea what was going on. I actually Googled cardiac arrest to be sure it was what I thought it was, which it is. It's a heart attack. And so, the rest of the day was kind of a blur. At the time that I called, he was in the cath lab getting a stent put in, and they were trying to see what they could do. They revived him. Thankfully, he had been in the hospital, but I was able to FaceTime with him. He was all connected to machines, or he was responsive, but not able to talk. I guess he was able to squeeze my mom's hand as she was standing there with him. But he just did not improve at their local hospital all day. That evening, they airlifted him to a better hospital in Atlanta, a heart specialty hospital. I got on a red eye that evening, arrived in Atlanta at 6 a.m. and we went straight to the hospital. And, I showed up. I'm the big sister. Wanted to have it together. And I thought, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take all the notes and I'm going to help the family get it together for Dad's recovery. So I sat there in the little room with the doctor and my notebook. I was all ready to go. And the doctor just immediately started talking in the soft, quiet voice. And it was clearly not good news. And so I have a whole page of terrible things that he told me in my notebook. And he ended the conversation. Probably we were in there for 15 minutes. Just, thankfully we were all in agreement that we knew my dad would not wish to, he was on an ECMO machine at the time, like what they give to COVID patients, but he was not well enough to be disconnected even to go into surgery. And so there was really nothing to be done. So we all had to be in agreement to take him off of the life support system. And we were very fortunate. It's hard to use that word, but I'm really glad that I was there and not 2,500 miles away to stand at his bedside and hold his hand. He was sedated, so we never actually got to interact, but we were there with him while he passed. And yeah.
Take a moment, because,
Yes.
I'm just tuning in and sensing with you. And what I can tell is that the kind of death that you describe is sudden. The family is unprepared, and that leaves people with a shock, which is the first step of a trauma response, which is understandable given the circumstances. And so it's good to take time, because, trauma's description is too fast, too soon, too much or too little to be able to integrate it. And it is often not because that's the way it wants to be, but that's just how life happens. And it's good to be with the story and not be swept away with it. So we want to take a bit of time and give you as well a bit of space, because this is something quite recent, but also people can relate to it when they listen to it, having maybe someone in their life that they have experienced that with or heard of. So that must have been quite a shock for your whole family to be with that and to make that decision.
It certainly was, but I'm very grateful that we all knew there was no question about what decision was appropriate to make. And I'm so glad that I was able to be there, with my mom and my brother. And we were very fortunate to have a wonderful chaplain at the hospital, which I never even, before this, I didn't know what a chaplain was for, what they did. I thought they were only there to read last rites and to pray. My family is not religious. My dad certainly was not. And so, we weren't interested in help in those areas. But as soon as he passed, and I had to be the one to poke my head out of the ICU room and say, I think that he's gone. She came in and immediately started saying everything that you just said. This is traumatic. You're in shock. This was sudden. This was fast. You haven't had time to process, and that's normal. And even more reassuringly, she sort of spent the next hour or two with us and saw how my mom and brother and I interacted, even in the midst of these awful moments. But she was encouraging. She said, you're doing the right things. You're crying. You're talking to one another. I can tell that you're a loving family. I can tell that you loved him. Tell us about him. Tell me what he was like. Tell me some stories about your dad. I've never spoken to her before or since. We got a lovely note from her after the hospital. I know she does this as a job every day, but in that moment, she was just like a guardian angel sort of sent to shepherd us and over this this horrible threshold and take us over, into our very first moments and hours of a very long grieving process.
And you make a beautiful point there. You say it's her job. And, I've just spoken to someone else on another podcast before, and it's important to know that these people who do those jobs, hopefully do those jobs because they feel called to do those. That's, in most cases, it's hard work that is also heart work. It's people are called to do these jobs because they feel they can make a difference, not because they want to have a job that gives them money and that they choose that. That's not usually why people would choose to be a chaplain or a social worker. It's because they have found the place where their heart sits with people in the most challenging situations. I just remembered my social worker when my daughter died. There was a lady that came to the NICU and she wasn't dressed in the clothes that the NICU nurses were. So I thought, who is that person? But she was standing next to me with her calm presence. And she was talking to me even before we disconnected, or we made the decision to disconnect my daughter from medical care. And similarly to you, it was this person that was there to support me along the way, giving me suggestion as what to do. And that, I see with working with clients and talking to people for the podcast, this is pivotal. That support at the beginning, that holding environment, providing people with normalization of their experiences.
Yeah, indeed. And I think, grief is an extremely isolating experience. In the moment that I was standing in the room, holding my father's hand and watching the heartbeat slow on the monitor until it wasn't there anymore, was just surreal. Actually, something I try not to dwell on or think about too often, because I think it kind of can create additional neural pathways that don't really need to be there on those lines of thinking.
Yeah.
But at the time that I lost my dad, actually, the morning that I got the call that he had the heart attack, I also got a call the same day from a very, very dear friend of mine since second grade. And we would visit each other's families every summer. Her parents were my second parents and mine were hers. She had moved away to Boston from Atlanta. So we were sort of pen pals at the time. And we just knew each other's families so well. We were like sisters, and we haven't seen each other as often as adults. You know how it can be. But I got a text from her saying, "Do you have a moment to talk about something important?" And I knew that wasn't good either. My second text of the morning that I knew was not going to contain good news. So I was out walking my dog actually, and I popped in my headphones and I gave her a call. And she was calling to let me know that her mother had died 2 days prior, which was wholly unexpected and shocking for me to hear. She had cancer, but hadn't shared that too much with her family, and I certainly hadn't known. And so I was able to kind of hear her story. And at this time, we didn't know if I didn't know what the nature of his heart attack was. It was a massive one, but we didn't know. We thought it might have been something small, something he could change diet, exercise, have a surgery, recover from. So I heard her story and her outpouring of grief and talking about going to pick up her mother's remains. And I was almost in two places. I was hearing her and grieving for her mother, who I loved and knew so well growing up, and dealing with all of that, and then thinking, is this in my future? Is this what I'm going to be going through next? So she and I stayed in touch, over the next hours, and she was one of the first people that I called when my dad passed. And it was such a wonderful thing, just going back to grief being isolating and the importance of human connection. It wasn't wonderful, the situation that either of us was in. We would have never wanted it. But how incredible that my friend that I've shared so many milestones with over so many years, growing up from 7 years old to in our 40s, that we had this milestone, this major traumatic event happen in our lives within days of one another. And I think that during that time, we were just lifelines to one another. We were texting all day. We were on the phone every evening. And we were both in the same raw place with the very immediacy of the loss. And those days are just, it's only been nine months, but I've almost blocked them from memory because they were so difficult. But she was there, and she was not just there for me, but she was in it with me. And I think that was just one of the lifelines that I had in those early days, to be able to share that with my dear friend.
Would you say that going through the same or similar experience with your friend side by side, would you say that gave you a sort of understanding of what is normal in a very unusual experience? Because, really significant loss, and our parents are often the first one to die, unless in my case it's a child that is first significant loss. So I'm wondering if that going through that with a friend was enabling you to see the normalcy in that very hard and abnormal experience? Or how would you say that resource was helping you?
I mean, I think that, yes, it totally helped us both feel completely validated in all of the feelings that we had. And some of the feelings, I'm sure are very weird. And, the first night we ended up on the phone with her and her father and me and my mother. And we just started sharing stories of our deceased parents. And, we had been crying, just doubled over in tears all day long. And then all of a sudden on this call, I found myself doubled over in laughter as we shared these stories. I mean, it's weird to say, but on the day that my father died, I don't know if I've laughed so hard in years. And it's all the immediacy of the emotions that are right close to the surface on that day. But it felt so normalizing to be having such a strange experience. We even said on the phone, what are we laughing about? How can we be laughing right now? But that was part of the grief too. And that was part of the healing process. And I think that being able to share those things, it definitely helped us feel less alone. And it definitely, I think, put us on a healthy path toward processing and accepting what had happened and supporting one another and holding each other through it, because you can't do it alone. It's just too large of a burden to bear all by yourself.
It's so beautiful how you were able to share the acute grief at the beginning of, and how you shared it with your friend. Now, if we're looking at it from now, sort of 9 months or 10 months, you said, later, and if you look back, how has it developed now? Where are you today in relation to your grief?
Well, I think the most important thing in my processing has been the art that I make, and which is how you found me. And art is how I process just about everything that I go through, and has been for many years. And I think that it's just that that's opened me up to a wider network of connections. I get DMs all the time from people who have experienced a loss, and months on, people are finding my posts and saying, oh my gosh, I just lost a parent a couple weeks ago, a couple days ago, very recently. And, I know your loss is further away for you, but I can really relate to all the feelings that you wrote about. And again, I just keep coming back to the importance of connection with other people in the healing process. Mm-hmm. And so I'd say losing a parent is an expected loss. My father was 80. He had a full life. In many ways, we had a complicated relationship, and so my grief has been complicated for those reasons. But it is perhaps easier to make peace with it when I do feel like he had all the opportunities in life that he wanted to have, and that he died having accomplished everything that he wanted to do.
And what I hear as well, in terms of what you said about the loneliness of the experience of grief and the importance of connection, I think I wanna hook into there, because I heard it expressed in a beautiful way by another podcast guest, Shelby. She said, one of the common experiences that grievers have is this feeling of alone. So in my case, I lost one of my twins on her third day. So I was convinced I'm sure I'm the only one experiencing that. I was to find out that I wasn't. There's in fact groups of twin parents. Mm-hmm. It's something that happens. It's maybe not as often as you lose a parent. That's sort of a given. But I think it's important for people to hear that connection, because that loneliness that you feel is just that because, so in your case, you had a best friend or a good friend close to you, and that's not necessarily the case for people, but there are people that experience what you just experienced as well, somewhere on the planet. And I think in this case where people see your art and can connect with it, it's exactly that. And the beauty of forums like Instagram is that you can connect to someone like you through a DM and feel like, oh my God, she gets what I'm going through. She has exactly the same emotions, and she describes exactly what I'm doing, what I'm going through now. And I think that's the beauty, because then people are allowed to feel less alone in their experience and less abnormal, because really those strong emotions that we go through, even if it is with a parent who is 80 and has a full life, because truthfully, every child wants their parents to be here. And even if it's normal that they're going to die, it's not something that we sort of gratefully accept. Oh, okay, it's time. That's not a reality, as much as it is sensible that at the beginning is birth and at the end is death. It's not as easy as cognitively we understand it.
Right.
What do you think now, looking back, how has loss and trauma shaped you in relation to this experience and with your family, the way you have dealt with it, each other?
Well, it's definitely changed the dynamic in my family hugely. I mean, my father was really larger than life, and really just was the powerhouse, the center of the family in so many ways. And so to have him suddenly gone out of our lives was just, everyone felt unmoored. I think it's just like, what do we do now? My mother and brother went back to my mom's house shortly after. I guess it was maybe 2 days after he passed. My mom was not planning to be in Atlanta at all. She hadn't packed an overnight bag. Everything happened on emergency basis. She had to get home to get her medications. And I couldn't go. I got on a plane and got back to Los Angeles because I said, I just can't go in that house, because it was so him. Everything there was his, and it was too fresh and too raw for me. But I saw my mother and brother sort of going back and making that place their own. And your guests won't be able to see this actually, but I'm working on an oil painting that's behind me on the Zoom. And it's from one of the days that my brother and mom went back to her house. My brother went fishing, which was my father's favorite activity. And so, what I'll add to this painting is him releasing a fish into the water from the dock. And he took that photo and sent it to me. And, I kind of, they led the way for me because I didn't go back there for a little while, but it's like, that was really his place, but we've sort of taken and made it our own in a way that we're still honoring his memory and all the things that he loved about it. And in a way, it's like him not being there makes me appreciate it even more. And it's like, I can see it through his eyes in a way. What was so special about that place to him, and what was so special about the people, our family. And so, my brother and I have really come together and are doing a lot more with my mom now. We just have a different sort of relationship with her. And she's just been incredible. She's grieving every day, but she's inspiring, and she's starting to, go through his belongings, and it's all a very long process. But I think that we have this appreciation for one another. And I certainly have a better appreciation for the sharpness of grief and loss. I feel almost embarrassed to look back on some of the things that I've said to people that I've known in the past who have had a loss, all the ways that people respond to you that are just not at all helpful. And people want to be helpful, but people don't want to get too close to your grief. They don't want to get too close to your trauma. They don't want to, they may know, everybody knows on some level, this is something I will go through one day, but nobody wants to think about it, and nobody wants to be confronted with it. And so, people try to tell you things that they think will make you feel better, but they're really just making themselves feel better, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the reasons, just, going back again to connection, that's one of the critical things about making these connections with other people who really understand. We call it being in the club. It's the club that everybody eventually joins, but nobody really wants to. And for the first weeks, I could tell who was in the club and who wasn't based on, some of the things that they said and how they responded to me. So I found it much more healthy and helpful for my healing process to surround myself with the people who were willing to be in my grief with me and to understand it and not to try to push it away by saying, well, at least he was 80. He had a long life. At least he did this, at least that. And those things aren't false. They're true, but they don't acknowledge the depth of and the validity of the immediate, the grief of the immediate loss.
Yeah. You said something really poignant here about people being unintentionally insensitive. And the way you worded that was really good. You said, some people don't like to get too close to my grief or my trauma. And I think that's a good way to say it. I think some people are overwhelmed with the intensity and they just don't know what to do. And because we're a society that is so geared towards feeling good, looking good, being happy, good vibes only, it's like when life happens, which includes birth and death. I mean, we celebrate birth. Why not celebrate a life that also ends in death? In my case, I held my daughter as she drew her last breath. And I felt in that moment the honor to be allowed to be present for her on that doorway to the world that I don't know yet. Of course, in my position as a mother, I wanted to have 2 babies. I was carrying them as I was pregnant. But still, to be allowed to be present in her passing for me was just an honor. I mean, it sounds weird, but I just felt it. I remember it was such an honor. I was like, oh my God, I'm allowed to hold you in that moment where you pass this door. And, I remember I said to my husband a little bit later, I said, suddenly everything feels right. It sounds really weird, and I don't understand it cognitively, but yeah. But it's like those people, I call them, or there's a metaphor that calls them those people who come in right after a loss. They are the firefighters. They metaphorically help you put out the fire or come with the casseroles or help you fill out those papers. And then there are those people who are the builders. They come in later and they help you rebuild your metaphorical house after a loss. And certain people in our environments have one or the other. And the very rare gems have both of those capabilities to be a firefighter and a builder. And many have neither of those capabilities. They're just not... They don't want to get too close to you. Mm-hmm. Now, I have another question, and I'm wondering if you want to go there. So, because you said something that caught my interest. You said the relationship with your father wasn't the easiest. Mm-hmm. And I can relate to that with my own father. And he's also 82 this year. So I'm wondering, it's something that is not openly spoken about or not often spoken about. And I just recently heard Frank Anderson, which is a trauma specialist, talk to David Kessler about his relationship to his dad, where he said it wasn't an easy one. And he's talking about it from an internal family system point of view, where he says, a part of me was relieved when my father died because it was such a difficult relationship and that part had such a hard time, where other parts, you really missed that father. So, how is it on a whole with a relationship that might not be easy with a father to lose him?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to go there. Well, I'm not happy, but it's funny that when he first when I first got the news that he had the heart attack, I admit I didn't even want to travel. I'd said we had a lovely visit the week before, but it's a complicated relationship, and there were some moments that weren't as lovely, and I think that some of the trauma response is just not at least for me, is not wanting to deal with whatever's right in front of me and not even wanting to pretend that just wanting to pretend that it's not real. Oh, this isn't happening. This is not happening. So if I don't go to Atlanta, he can't die because it's not actually happening. But part of that was my husband was like, well, if it was my father, I'd be on the plane right away. So it took me some part of the day to decide to go. And I was there for everything important. So I'm grateful for that. But it was very, in life, in the ways that we didn't get along, he was very pushy. I don't know how to say. I always wanted to connect with my dad. One of my strongest memories from being a little kid was wanting to connect with him and wanting to be let into his world. And I've spent a lot of time in therapy exploring why that just didn't always happen. I felt that sometimes he did let me into his world and we were connected and it was wonderful. And other times I yearned to connect with him and just felt that I couldn't do anything right. Couldn't please him. I couldn't make him happy. There was just no living up to whatever standard that he had in his mind for me. And I worked so hard my whole childhood in ways that still shape and define me, to be above reproach and to always be the best daughter and the best person so that I could have that connection, because I felt that with an intermittent sort of unpredictable type of connection that we had, that it was, in my child's mind, I thought that it's all because if I'm good, then he connects with me. And if I'm not good, then he doesn't. Right. Of course, as adults, we know that it's not that simple. And so, the older that he got, the more I had to start putting up some boundaries. I had my own children. I saw some ways that he treated my kids that I didn't like how he would talk to them. I didn't like that he perpetuated the same types of behavior modifications, punishments, stuff like that onto my children that had been done to me. I couldn't abide that. And so I did have to have some boundaries and I did have to distance myself from him quite a bit. We had political differences big time. There were things that we just couldn't talk about, but he always wanted to talk about them. I remember a time that he was standing in my kitchen and he grabbed me by the shoulders and he was like, debate me on this topic. And I said, I don't want to. I'm not interested in having this fight with you. I know that it won't end well. And so, that was sort of, I recall that as soon as he passed, it was almost like in the moment, probably not, but the same day, it was like I was able suddenly to, when he was alive, I could only look at the man that was in front of me and the man that was giving me difficulty for whatever reason, right? But then as soon as he was gone, it was like all of a sudden I had this ability to see the full scope of our relationship and all the wonderful times too. And, people are complicated. People are a mixed bag. There's really hardly nobody out there, maybe a few people who are all good or all bad, but really no one. And so there was this part of me that didn't want to go to be at his bedside because I was angry with him because he had hurt me in many ways over many years of my life. And there was a part of me, there still is a part of me that is relieved that, when something comes up in the news that I know we would have a political disagreement about, or a philosophical disagreement about, I'm glad that I don't have to talk to him about it. I'm really glad that when I call my mom, he won't be in the background saying things to agitate, because he liked to agitate people, he liked to kind of push your buttons and get to you. And I'm so glad that I don't have to deal with that anymore, but I still miss him. And so it's just sort of a matter of holding these two truths at once. I loved him and that was true. And also he was really difficult and I didn't always like him. And that's also true.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm so glad how you described this paradox, because it's so many people's experiences and it's my experiences with my dad as well. And I'm so grateful for you to be so open and willing to share that, because it's the truth. And often we have to reel with those emotions within us and a lot of people might not be able to hear that and to say, yeah, but that's true too. It's both sides. It's not either or. And I think it's important to realize that in the scope of everything, because that is also something that grievers have to sort out within themselves. What do I do with both of those sides?
There was a moment that I thought about just while talking, that we were at my mother's house after his funeral, and we were all eating takeout pizza, which he hated takeout. He had to have every meal cooked, and he liked my mom to cook for him. And so we were sitting up at the table eating our pizza that he would have never eaten. And then I looked out the window, and through the trees, I could just see this orange glow. And I said, guys, there is a spectacular sunset happening down at the dock. And I was like, we better go. So we abandoned our food in the middle of our meal and just left it on the table. And we all ran down to the dock. And he would have never, I can't imagine a world where my father had accepted people just leaving a meal half eaten and going to, because he was just so rigorous about things like that. But we all flooded down there, and the sunset was just spectacular, and it went on and on. And it was one of the most beautiful things I've seen. And they've had that house since 1989. I've seen many sunsets there, but this one was very special. And we cried and we held each other. And I appreciated that was a beautiful moment that we couldn't have had, in another world, and doesn't make up for the loss. You're not like, oh, I saw a beautiful sunset, I'm glad that Dad wasn't around. But it's just one of those things that sort of maybe one of those early moments that made me feel like, okay, life goes on. And it's not better or worse. It just continues. Yeah. And there's beauty. There's things in the world that have happened that I've experienced that, I wouldn't have if my dad hadn't died. So, and that's tough too, because that's another, I'm grateful for this thing. I'm not grateful that he's gone, but they're both true.
So to bring this to a nice round, I want to actually reflect on something that you said before, because that is important, I think, for people to hear. When you said that what you tried to achieve in your relationship as a girl with your father, and what we know is that any loss or any trauma that is happening in present time is sitting on the relational trauma, the developmental trauma that we all carry from our upbringing. And what is relational or developmental trauma? These are the things that happen when parents are good enough parents, when parents do the best that they can, but they are not able to be fully attuned, or like you described your dad, you wanted, and the child wants to have a relationship, and they always think, if I'm only better, or if I'm not doing that, or if I'm doing that, to get the father's attention, they always take responsibility on themselves and personalize that it must have something to do, rather than believing they are not capable to be fully attuned, fully the person that I need them to be. And it's important to understand that, because how we're texturing what's going on in present tense is based on that base of how we have been taught, how we have been cultured to learn to see that. And, just like in any other situation, not necessarily loss and trauma, this is the base with which we then look at the world. And so, having your dad die also allows life to go in different direction, because suddenly that factor of keeping certain rules in place is no longer there. I remember my grandmother, when my grandfather died, suddenly she would do things that she never allowed herself to do before. Yep. And it freed her in a way that I was glad for her. I missed my grandfather, but I was also glad for her to be free of those imposed, not rules, but shackles that she put on herself. So right. I think it's important to recognize all of it being part of that.
Yes, absolutely.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much for your openness and willingness to be so real and honest and raw about it. And, I really want to say one thing about your art. The one post that you did about grief being a gift, the gift that keeps on giving, the gift that doesn't keep on giving. So we're going to link that in the show notes as well, because you speak so much truth in that. And what I see people as making a decision or coming to a point in the decision in their grief where they see the grief as a gift, as a gift that they don't want, and things happening to them. Or there comes a point in time when they see, okay, grief is a gift, and even though I wouldn't have chosen to receive that gift, I'm going to see it as, what does it do for me? What can I see the beauty of that gift? Not because I wanted that loss, but because we did not have any choice in the matter of the loss in the first place.
Right. Absolutely. And it's an inevitable thing too. You know, it's something that you can't escape. It's there eventually. So you don't get to choose so many things we don't get to choose. So we can only choose how to find our peace with what's happened. And, you know, for me, art is a big part of that processing. But also being able to look at the grief as a gift and say, well, I'm feeling this way because of the importance that this person had in my life. And aren't I lucky to have had these life experiences, good and bad, that have shaped me and made me who I am.
So I'm looking forward to more of your sharings in relation to grief and loss and how you process it and what comes up. Thank you so much for sharing those experiences with us.
Thank you.
Shall we come to the rapid fire questions?
Sure.
So grief and trauma means?
That you've lost something of value. You've lost something that was meaningful and worthy to you. And so now you have to find your way in life without that thing.
And healing means?
Healing means taking baby steps toward finding that life, toward rediscovering your joy and meaning, and putting the loss in its appropriate context in the whole span of your life, right? Removing yourself from the immediacy of the moment and being able to take a fuller perspective and look forward, which is not easy to do and a long process.
And what I have learned about myself in the light of loss and trauma?
I can keep breathing, even when I think I can't.
And one thing I wish people knew about loss and trauma?
Really, so much of what we talked about today, how important it is to connect with other people, and how the feelings of isolation are very real, but you can heal more when you don't isolate and when you share.
Absolutely. I would
find those firefighters and the builders. I love that analogy. I haven't heard it before.
Oh,
it's
great.
Wonderful.
And name one specific thing that has changed since your loss of your father that you wouldn't want to miss.
I think that since my father's been gone, I've been able to sort of let go of that child, that inner child, that part of me that wants to please him and that kind of looks to him for approval in almost everything that I do. And I think that as a result, I've been able to create more freely. I've been much more prolific in my art. I've been much more able to write about grief and mental health and other topics. I think that I'm, in a weird way, maybe making art for myself for the very first time in my life, because I just don't have that person out there that I'm trying to please anymore. And I miss him, but I'm also grateful for the pieces of myself that I'm starting to discover.
Yeah. You know, there's a saying that comes back to my mind from a developmental course that I did. And it's like that. It says, whatever I do, wherever I go, I see mommy and daddy and they see me. In a way to say, whatever we're doing in life, we're in a way inadvertently trying to please our early caregivers. So it's a thing to ponder, to take with us.
I ponder it a lot as a mother too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Tori. It's been such a beautiful conversation with you, and thank you so much for your authenticity and honesty and all of that.
Likewise. Thank you so much for the wonderful conversation, for your insights and your wisdom. I feel I started out the podcast saying I was having a good day. I'm feeling good, but I think I feel about 10 times lighter now. So I really appreciate our conversation.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.